Welcome back. You know, if there's one silver lining about Sandy, it has likely been that it has forever changed the way that we will look at storms and disaster preparedness. Now, many are asking rightly if there is a better way to prepare ourselves for the next one, and some are looking to Europe for inspiration. Experts now wonder if the massive storm surge that flooded lower Manhattan and washed away parts of the Jersey Shore could have been solved by sea barriers. Now, some scientists say Staten Island originally started as a natural barrier island, but the construction of roads, parking lots, and homes created an urban landscape taking away this natural shield. Now, two European engineering firms, they're proposing massive shields like these, walls at the head of the New York harbor. Now, flood protections that were once considered unnecessary, they're now being reconsidered after Sandy's 14-foot surge.
Anyone who says there's not a dramatic change in weather patterns, I think is denying reality.
Oceanography professor Malcolm Bowman says a redesign is critical.
If we had implemented these barriers by now, there would have been no damage to New York City from the ocean.
The barriers, they're high-tech. In one design, a wall lays flat at the bottom of the harbor, pivoting up when needed to block a storm surge. And they've also been proven effective in other major coastal regions like London and the Netherlands, operating 24 hours a day. But one proposal for New York's harbor runs upwards of $6 billion, and skeptics say the massive barriers may not work on long stretches of the coastline like the Jersey Shore.
When you have an enormous harbor like we do in Long Island Sound, even if you spent a fortune, it's not clear to me that you would get much value for it.
But with damage estimates for the storm reaching into the tens of billions, many are now saying it might be time to consider new ideas. So, is it time to have a national conversation about climate change and preparing for more dramatic weather events? Now, to get to the bottom of this, we sat down for a more in-depth conversation with that professor you just heard from, Malcolm Bowman. He's a professor of physical oceanography at the Marine Sciences Research Center at SUNY Stony Brook. Now, he's also the coordinator of the Stony Brook Storm Surge Group, which studies ways that New York City can protect itself from flooding in the aftermath of extreme weather events. He told us how he's been pushing for better storm preparation for years. I suppose the temptation to say "I told you so" is something you have to fight, because you've been saying for a long time about not only the possibility but the inevitability of something that we've just seen in our region. And you have the world's attention in many ways right now. For those who say, hey, you know what, Professor, this is just a 1 in 100 year type phenomenon. We shouldn't be building policy around something that we haven't seen before. What would your answer be?
I would say if you look at Hurricane Irene and now Hurricane Sandy, 12 months apart, we have two 100-year events 12 months apart. So I feel that we're in an era of changing weather patterns that we have to take very seriously. And I'm not saying we're going to have an event like this every year, but we need to, in our planning for the protection of New York City and the surrounding area, we need to rethink our policy.
The world is changing. If you could put it in context for the layperson, for our audience to just get their hands around on how water levels are changing, on how climate change is really changing with unbelievable rapidity where we are right now, try and give us some context that we can really get.
Well, there's a lot of controversy in the United States about whether climate change is real, but I can tell you without hesitation that climate change is real. We have the best scientists working on this, climatologists, weather forecasters, oceanographers. It's something we have to take very seriously. It's something we have to start planning for in the future. I'm not saying that Irene and Sandy prove climate change, but they are consistent with climate change. It's like building a case. They're exhibits A and B, and we're going to see exhibits C, D, E, and F coming along that we must be prepared for.
Let's talk about models that have worked in other places. The Netherlands model, which we just described. How would it work if we tried to do it here? And again, I guess use the context of the superstorm that we just really saw come through here. What kind of a barrier could it provide, and where would it go from where to where theoretically?
What I've been proposing is a 5-mile barrier from the Sandy Hook, New Jersey, northern tip of New Jersey, across to Far Rockaway, Breezy Point. People have seen those horrible images of the burning community the other day. This would be a 6-lane interstate highway, a toll road. The water flow in and out would flow underneath. It would be like an elevated causeway. There would be large gates for shipping to pass through under normal conditions. The gates would be slammed shut. The advantage of this particular location over others we've looked at is that it would form complete protection for Staten Island, the South Shore, Long Island, Kennedy Airport, Newark Airport, LaGuardia Airport, Port Elizabeth, New Jersey, Manhattan, the business district, the Raritan River communities, all those communities that have suffered so dreadfully in the last few days.
I saw a price tag. The estimate for this would be somewhere in the neighborhood of about $6 billion. It makes sense, at least to me as a lay person, Professor, but to those folks who say, well, wait a minute, what about the other affected areas up and down the Jersey coastline? What about other areas in Long Island that were devastating? Are we playing basically priorities with different communities based strictly on, I guess, the value of the geography?
Well, that's true. I mean, firstly, we have to focus on New York City, that huge infrastructure, its importance on the global scene as a center of finance, medicine, science, the arts, and 8 to 12 million people. But you're quite right there. We cannot save the whole East Coast from the ravages of climate change, rising sea level, and extreme storms. It has to be prioritized. This is what we call social justice. Who is protected and who is not? And that's something that needs to be looked at very carefully. But we mustn't let a tragedy like this happen again.
Do me a favor, Professor, and scare the audience a little bit, because I think you have the attention of folks. And I've heard at every level of government, both federal, state, and even in the municipalities, everybody agrees this will happen again. There was a study conducted in 1995 that lays out, and just to remind everybody, it's not like we got hit by a Category 5 here. By the time it made landfall, though a nor'easter, it wasn't even a Category 1. They factored in all the modeling here, and in the worst ones, they didn't even estimate the loss of life because they thought it could be that extreme. If we don't do something about it, and there's a catastrophe even worse than Sandy, we won't be talking about how to dry the cities out here. We'll be having a much different conversation, won't we?
Yes, unfortunately, the loss of life in these tragedies seems to galvanize action. In 1938, we had a huge hurricane hit eastern Long Island. It was called the Long Island Express. And that drowned or killed 700 or 800 people in Long Island and New Jersey. That led actually to the construction of 3 storm surge barriers in cities that we know well. In New Jersey and in Connecticut, Rhode Island, Providence, Rhode Island, and New Bedford, Massachusetts. So we already have barriers in the Northeast that we don't really hear about. If you look at the European experience, in 1953 there was a very large storm in the North Sea that killed several thousand people in the Netherlands, Holland, and southeast England. And that led to the construction of what's known as the Thames River Barrier, which protects the city of London very effectively. That was opened in 1982. And the Dutch have built up a system they call the Delta Project, a system combining of both nourished or built sand levees or sand dunes that are already in existence, that have been strengthened, plus engineering structures to protect their cities and their ports. And the same thing has happened in Venice. The city is perpetually flooded, not so much due to climate change there, but the fact that the buildings built on mud are slowly sinking into the sediment. And so they've just about finished their system in the lagoons of Venice. But as I said earlier, the St. Petersburg experience is the most interesting one, and I would urge Mayor Michael Bloomberg to take his engineers and his long-term planners to St. Petersburg to take a look and see what the Russians have done. If they can do it, we can do it.
We have to take a quick break. Our next segment is Going Home. It is the story of 3 families who may have lost all or part of their homes, but not their hope. Please stay with us.